And we've gathered a lot of the former anchors to chat with us. You'll hear from them right after this.
A look in the street on 49th Street, followed by 12 NBC Page Boys. There comes the regal carriage. I see Mary Kelly and the boys. And perched up on the back between the two boys, I see a glimpse of His Majesty. There's Mary getting down. Come on in, old boy. And Buddy Manella and Roy Waldron and the King.
That was the famous Today Show chimp J. Fred Muggs triumphantly returning from his world tour back in 1954. Where in the world was J. Fred Muggs? Now, 48 years later, we've evolved, as you can see from the Homo sapiens hanging outside our studio windows on this Monday morning. And back inside Studio 1A, I'm Matt Lauer along with Katie Kirk and Ann Curry. We are, in case you didn't realize it, celebrating our 50th anniversary this Monday morning. It's the 14th of January, 2002.
Of course, J. Fred Muggs was on today for 4.5 years, originally brought aboard to bolster sagging ratings. We, of course, would never stoop to such shameless monkey business. We would never do that, except perhaps on our birthday. Oh, hi, Jonah. Nice to see you.
Oh, Jonah.
This is Jonah. He is 6 years old, and he is our... Oh, hello, Jonah. Why don't you sit next to me? Getting a little overexcited. He is our own version of J. Fred Muggs. He lives in a ranch in California, and we thought it was only appropriate for our 50th birthday that we have a J. Fred Muggs look-alike here. Isn't he sweet?
He's the sweetest thing I've ever seen.
And maybe you can hand me a few of those grapes because... oh, hi, Jonah. Apparently, Jonah enjoys grapes. And it was funny, I was reading... would you like one?
According to the literature, it said he enjoys grapes.
There we go. It was funny, I was reading about J. Fred Muggs, who... Come back here, Jonah. Oh, he wants to go to you, Matt. There you go.
Give good hugs, too.
J. Fred Muggs retired after 4.5 years. The press release said it was to expand his personal horizons. He moved to Florida, but apparently J. Fred Muggs has gotten a little ornery towards the end. We cannot say the same for Jonah, who's sweet as can be. By the way, he played Pericles in Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg.
Here, Jonah. Do you know that at the end of his tenure here, J. Fred Muggs had learned the tally light system on the cameras.
That's right.
He knew which camera was on him. He also knew that if he misbehaved, when the tally light was on, he couldn't be punished.
That's
that
true.
No one would do anything. He'd wait till after that, and then he'd run for his life off the set.
He was apparently so smart. Lee Merriweather said that she was on a plane with him once, and the sun came streaming into the plane. Hi, Jonah. And he pulled the window. Hello, everybody.
Okay, Jonah, thank you very much.
I say we bring back J. Fred Muggs to the show.
Anyway, Matt, why don't you tell folks what's coming up in this half hour?
He's got my arm caught between him and Ann. Coming up in this half hour, we're going to pay tribute to the man who's responsible for all this craziness, the pioneer who had the idea for the Today Show, and by the way, the Tonight Show as well, and the Home Show. His famous daughter will help us salute him.
Also, some past anchors of today, Barbara Walters, Hugh Downs, Tom Brokaw, and Jim Hartz will stop by. So we can say to them, thanks for the memories. Right now, Ellie and Carrie are saying, oh, Mom, can you bring him home? Forget it! Hi.
First,
how you doing, Jonah?
Let's go out to the plaza for a quick check of the weather with Al.
Today's weather is brought to you by Dunkin' Donuts. Nothing gets you going like the smooth, mellow taste of Dunkin' Donuts coffee.
Wow, talking about that little monkey love there. They're spreading the love. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Cosby. How are you, sir?
Cold.
Cold.
Yeah. Al.
Yes, sir.
Al, let's get another job.
No, this is the best.
No, we can't stay out here.
No, we have to stay
All
out.
the white people are inside, Al. This is not good,
You
Al.
finally figured it out for me.
I knew it. Hey, we gotta let's go to Green Bay. Yeah.
Well, it's so nice of you to stop by and celebrate our 50th with us.
Good. I'm glad you've been drinking. Good. Yes, I was 14 years old and the worst student at Central High School in Philadelphia.
And how has the Today Show changed your life?
Well, I stopped a lot of things, but mostly I've kept up some things like running watery eyes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you brought us a little something?
Yes, this is for you and the guys. For Katie, Payard, whatever. It's jelly and the powder has been checked out. Yeah.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Bill Cosby.
Al, it's
That's what's going on around the country. Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods. One of our original directors when we first started in 1952, Joe Michaels. His mom is here. How are you, Mrs. Michaels?
I'm fine, thank you, Alan.
All right.
It's really fun to be here today.
Well, you look lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so
very
much.
nice, very
Thank
nice,
you.
All right.
And
Now
it's so good to see you.
Well, it's good to be seen, but now we have to see Matt.
All right, Al, thank you very much. 50 years ago, there was no such thing as morning television, and the medium was in its infancy. Radio was king, and then an NBC executive named Sylvester Pat Weaver came along with a vision to make today a milestone in this country's social history.
We are in NBC's World Communications Center in the heart of Radio City, New York.
The New York Times called the broadcast a spectacular gamble.
I really believe begins a new kind of television.
And it was.
Hello, I'm Pat Weaver.
But Pat Weaver, a former advertising executive, was determined to inaugurate a new era of television programming.
I think those of us who had been running the business knew that radio was absolutely marvelous, but it was blind. Therefore, you could be there, but only with your ears. And while that to do in radio, it would be marvelous to really let people see the world. Every man a member of the elite, because everybody will be at the opera, at the ballet, at the concert hall. Everybody will see the great political events.
Do better.
We attempt to make visual the most important events of the day in a manner which will adjust the person to the fascinating world that he's going to face that day. And it's getting more fascinating and more complex every day. I hardly need tell you.
The basic concept was that everybody, when they got up in the morning, they wanted to know what was new today. They would turn on the set, because in the course of time, we would show them the new book, the new movie. We would introduce them to these big people. We would show them in the news world what had happened, where. We would go there, we would show them what it looked like, we would introduce them to new ideas that had come up, and we would also do it with a light spirit. They really would have a tremendous head start over other people if they saw the Today Show.
That was Pat Weaver's far-fetched idea 50 years ago. It's still our mission today. We're sorry that Pat isn't with us this morning, but we're pleased to welcome his daughter, Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney, nice to see you.
So happy to be here.
Most importantly, how's your dad doing?
He's doing very well. We just celebrated his 93rd birthday, and he's, I'm sure he's watching, and very excited about this anniversary, the 50th anniversary. It's great.
Do you think he's surprised at the show's longevity?
No, actually, I don't think he is, because I think finally, actually, we have the technology to do what my father envisioned, which was, in 15 minutes to half an hour, take someone around the world to the Olympics, or take someone around the world to the Great Wall of China, and give you information, amuse you, and, as he said, lighten your heart and spirit.
Your dad is a visionary. I mean, he's been called a genius, a pioneer, but certainly a visionary. He had an ability to see the future at a time when a lot of people in broadcasting weren't looking that far ahead.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
still that way?
He's still that way. I feel like he's probably more comfortable being in this century than anyone else I know. And very excited about it still at 93 and all the opportunities that people have.
He obviously is someone who came up with The Tonight Show, with the Home Show as well. He had a difficult time with this show, though, convincing the affiliates that it would work.
Yeah, this was a big gamble. I think they called it Weaver's Folly for quite a while. And so I think he's very pleased. He also felt it was very important to pick the right people, so you could be shaving or eating breakfast with people who would make you comfortable. So I think the hosts have had a lot to do with it,
I want to mention that you're performing at a benefit tonight for a special theater down close to Ground Zero, and that's been very hard hit since the September 11th attacks.
Yes, we're holding a benefit at the New Victory for the Flea Theater, which is down on 41 White Street, and we have a whole sort of hit parade of all the things that have played at the Flea, and we're getting a tremendous amount of support from people. It's going to be an exciting night.
Well, I want to thank you for coming today and sharing a little bit of Pat's vision with us, and if you're correct and your dad watches every day, Mr. Weaver, hats off to you, and thank you very much. Sigourney, thanks. We're back after this.
There's more of today's 50th anniversary when we come back. Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs.
Today's 50th anniversary moment is brought to you by Royal Caribbean. Get out there and take a Royal Caribbean vacation.
And we are privileged and honored this morning to welcome some very important members of the Today Alumni Association. You may have heard of a few of them. Barbara Walters started on Today as a writer-researcher, did her first on-air spots in 1962, and stayed for 14 years until 1976. Hugh did Something for Us. Mr. Downs was the host from 1962 until 1971. Tommy, can you see me? Our Tommy, Brokaw that is, was here from 1976 until 1982.
You gotta have heart.
Or Hearts. Our friend Jim Hartz was here for 2 years, beginning in 1974. Barbara, Hugh, Jim, Tom, good morning. Thank you all so much for being here and being part of this celebration. Great to see all of you. Barbara, let me start with you. You started as a writer, as I mentioned. You got your first on-air story back, I think, in 1962, covering Paris fashions. We've come a long way, baby. What was it like for a woman back then?
Well, in those days, when I first began as a writer, I was only allowed to write for the women. When Hugh came on the program, I wrote at that time, that was the big breakthrough. I could write for the men. And I wrote the introduction for
welcome
Hugh.
to the program, yeah.
And then later, I worked with Jim. And we worked a little bit together.
Temporarily during one summer when you were taking leave of this place, they brought me in here and to stop the hemorrhage.
Wow, I worked with some great men. But you know, it was so different. First of all, there was the woman was not named co-host. I was not named co-host until 2 years before I left. And now, fortunately, all of the women and men are equal,
which is nice.
And then there was a time when I couldn't even, not with either of these men. But there was a time when I was not allowed to ask the hard news question until the host then,
Frank McGee,
had asked 3 questions. It went all the way up to the president of NBC, who said, that's the way it should be. Barbara cannot come in until the 4th question.
Thank goodness that dog would not hunt today. Anyway, Hugh, you were an enlightened man back then because you were the co-anchor when Barbara was just starting to get on air, and you really helped her along, didn't you? So hats off to you.
Actually, when they were combing a roster of movie people to replace Maureen O'Sullivan, and I said, why don't we develop our own talent? And they said, such as? And I said, such as Barbara Walters. And they said, she's a writer. But I knew, and I don't take credit for discovering Barbara. She discovered herself.
Well, you obviously helped her along. Meanwhile, you were the co-anchor during one of the most turbulent times in history, the 60s,
of course. I anchored the show at a time that a lot was happening. Sure, there was assassinations, and it was
civil rights. Of course,
there's a lot of news now, too.
But it was really quite amazing. I know you're very proud of this interview you did with the Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yeah, that was an in-depth thing that showed me that he was working for the human race, not just the black race.
Meanwhile, you all traveled quite a bit together, you and Barbara.
We covered the world, didn't we?
Greece to Romania to Japan. Why were those shows so important in your view back then?
Well, it showed Today was expanding itself to the world, and we had a chance to see the world and show people who tuned in what all was going on.
And the fact that technology allowed you to do that was pretty amazing.
We did the
for that
first satellite
time.
interview.
That's right. Yes, for a regular show from the Buckingham Palace. Yeah. That was an interesting.
And it rained wherever we went. Hugh always said there's a fine veil of mist. Remember? It was pouring.
Looking on the bright side. You, of course, became one of the most celebrated and well-known journalists in the world, interviewing people like Henry Kissinger, the Eisenhowers. I watched that interview the other day. Judy Garland. But there was a particularly poignant interview you did with Princess Grace back in the 60s. Tell me about that, Barbara.
Johannes, what do you
It was the first interview, and I think perhaps the only interview that she did for television. And it was very difficult because she was not used to answering questions. And at the end of it, I don't know whether you have this on tape, I said to her, are you happy? I can't remember any interviews. I do remember this. And she said, I have a certain peace of mind. And this was after she was her Her Serene Highness.
Later she cried, didn't she?
Later
after
she
the
cried.
It was over after the camera started.
She cried, and I wanted to cry. She said, and the questions were not difficult questions, but it was so hard for her. At that point, she was so used to having to keep everything inside to then be questioned. It was one of the unhappier interviews that I did, as lovely as she was.
Oh, she was so beautiful. Jim, I know you came on board in 1974 after a very successful stint as a local New York anchor. One of your biggest assignments during that time was the bicentennial.
Right.
That must have been so much fun to cover, Jim.
It really was. We went to every state in the Union during a period between 1975 up to the bicentennial 1976 and did a live show every Friday morning. And you were talking about the rain, you, Barbara. We did those shows. We had one rain day in a year, and we were outdoors every Friday in every state of the Union.
Wow.
One rain day, and it was in New York, as a matter of fact.
Well, you were very lucky. What is your fondest memory of being on the show? Is there anything that sticks out for you?
Well, yeah, Alaska, Hawaii, California, Oregon, Washington. Tell me when to stop. No, that was the high point. We did the bicentennial, and it was like seeing the nation all in one moment in its 200th birthday.
It's so patriotic and exciting.
Yeah.
Tom, meanwhile, along comes Tommy in 1976, and the hours were really a tough adjustment for you, weren't they?
Well, I'd been covering the White House and was used to a whole different schedule and a whole different mindset. And not too long after I assumed the job on this program, people will find this hard to believe these days, given your very tight organization, but I overslept one morning, and no one seemed to notice. They just started the show without me. It was a little unsettling. I went back and reviewed my contract.
On a more serious note, I know that you covered this country in very troubling times, and the assassination attempts on President Reagan and the Pope, the assassination of Anwar Sadat.
Right.
But the show that followed the assassination of John Lennon was particularly memorable for you.
Yeah, it happened in the middle of the night. John Lennon was assassinated on the Upper West Side of New York, and it did demonstrate to me a couple of things. One was the enormous impact, obviously, of the Beatles around the world, and we overnight scrambled and went everywhere in the world the next day. The full 2 hours was devoted to John Lennon, and I always thought that was kind of a sea change, because today responded so magnificently, not to a political figure, but to a critically important cultural figure of our time, and it took us in another direction, I think.
Meanwhile, of course, it's become part of broadcasting lore, the interview that broke the camel's back, that made you say, "I've had it, enough is enough," is that great interview you did with Charlene Tilton.
Yeah, I didn't know who Charlene Tilton was. She was a cast member of Dallas, and I guess she was primarily known for her T-shirts. And I had come from a more traditional journalist background, and you can see the body language there.
You were not feeling so comfortable.
And I thought it was probably time for me to go back and do what I did. But I loved doing this broadcast because it had opened so many new areas to me in so many ways. Culturally, the theater, books that I wouldn't have read, people that I got to meet.
And world events you got to cover.
And world events that I got to cover,
well,
right.
I think it's the best job there is.
I think it's a fabulous job,
I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. Thanks. It's so great to see all of you. Barbara, Hugh, Jim,
There is
Sean.
one big difference between then and now, obviously, that the audience, we all made a lot more money.
No, I knew that was coming.
Yeah. And we all had darker hair. That's the two differences.
Yeah. Same with me. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all. We'll be back with more of our very special 50th anniversary edition of Today right after this.
Still to come, Today alums Jane Pauley, Bryant Gumbel, Joe Garagiola, and a lot more surprises.
I hope you have as much fun talking with them as I had talking with my group. They were so terrific. And also, still to come on this very, very special 50th anniversary, filmmaker Ken Burns turns his cameras on Today. But first, these messages.